comes a new challenger.
What's up, YouTube? ChallengerTCG is back again. We just went live a little bit earlier to talk about the ban list. Probably by the time you're watching this, that'll have happened yesterday, but we wanted to come in and give you guys our opinions on the post-ban list, tier list, what we think is the best, what we think are the winners and losers, kind of. We've also got an article coming out that Daniel wrote very soon, so check that out. We'll have that linked in the description below. But yeah, just to have some discussion, we wanted to talk about the changes and where we think that all of the legends are now placed. Of course, if you guys haven't watched before, S tier is the best, Garen tier is the worst. Garen's already there. The metal card side quest, what this basically means is that these are legends that most likely if you're playing them, they are specifically, you're going for a best of metal card. You're not really planning to like win the event. Like these don't really have a very high chance of winning the event. I guess one of the ones that we can kind of address really quick before we jump into the rest is someone who shot down quite a bit and is now in the metal card side quest tier once again. She was there for the longest time, and that is Jinx. Jinx was propelled all the way from metal card side quest up to B tier simply because of how oppressive and crazy the miracle deck was, and you could literally just copy paste that engine from the Draven builds into Jinx, and it, even though she wasn't quite as strong as what Draven was doing, she still basically was playing almost the exact same deck, and what that deck was doing was so powerful that even a leader like Jinx, who was basically never competitive for the entirety of Riftbound, was propelled all the way up to like the status of a tier 1.5, tier 2 deck. So yeah, what do you guys think about any comments from anyone else as far as why Jinx is in metal card, or any thoughts there?
No, I mean, yeah, exactly. She's always kind of been there, and now she's back in her rightful home now that she doesn't get to abuse the Miracle Engine with just a blank leader.
Yep, she lost quite a bit. So RIP Jinx, fan favorite. Maybe someday discard matters will actually be good. Other than that, we're going to be jumping in talking about probably the biggest loser of the entire list, which I would say is Draven Vanquisher. We have decided to put Draven into the B tier, falling from his tier 0 grace. Collin, you definitely are the Draven aficionado around here, so what are your thoughts about the Glorious Executioner moving into the B tier?
Yeah, obviously he's had 3 different variations of him that have existed over the course of this format, being Detonate, Miracle, and just like classic midrange. And 2 of those got completely removed off the face of the earth. I don't think there's any variation of Miracle that can exist anymore with the removal of both Scrap Heap, Cold Shot, and Fight or Flight. Those are 3 very important cards for the deck at various stages, so I just don't think there's realistically enough filtering in order to abuse our Rassas, our Battering Rams, all that sort of stuff. So I think those variations will be completely dead, and then midrange Draven will maybe still have a little bit of life here in the B tier. He still gets to play a lot of very powerful cards in general without Fight or Flight. I think that's obviously the biggest hit. Then all of these purple decks are going to be struggling to hold particularly as well. I think that's really where they got hit the most. I do think he can still be pretty aggressive, and you're still drawing a bunch of extra cards to fuel what it is that you're doing. We still have Spinning Axe as one of the best signature spells in the entire game. Our chosen champ now probably going to be Draven Showboat if I had to guess. But it kind of works in the strategy of now just trying to get some early points, play this big showboat, and ride that to victory, hopefully. So we'll have to do some testing here to see exactly where he shakes up. But I think in general, he's going to be kind of in this middling tier of not too bad. I wouldn't be surprised if a Draven still made top cut at one of these next events, but we'll have to see.
Alex, any thoughts?
No, I mean, I'll be the first one to say the king is dead. B tier is probably appropriate, and he still has a very, very powerful legend effect. So that alone might be able to carry him, albeit not quite in his his former graces. But yeah, I think he's fine. I think B tier is probably the highest he reaches. I would be very shocked if this was still A tier, and if it was, that would be kind of disappointing given that he's lost 2 of his battlefields, his main chosen champ, and his main spell. That would be incredibly upsetting, in fact. So I think B tier is appropriate for the time being, but I could easily see this guy falling into C tier potentially. I don't think he could ever be metal card side quest, however.
Yeah, I mean, I think the legend is still. We did not get, we've talked about it multiple times on the channel, of course, but we did not get any actual changes to combat. We did get a little bit of a clarification to combat rules, but not in a way that actually affects Draven. So he's still working. The legend is still working the same way it's been working, and the legend has been always, basically the most important part of the deck. So even though, yes, we don't have Vanquisher, which is huge, we don't have Fight or Flight, which is huge. I mean, the deck is still capable of drawing so many cards. It still punishes you for playing the game of Riftbound, so I can't imagine that this will fall off too hard. And like Collin said, I wouldn't be surprised to see it in Top Cut. Next up, we got my favorite Volibear. We have now moved Volibear up into the B tier. I do think that Dazzling Aurora is a big winner. Obviously, we did lose Obelisk of Power, but so did every single deck. So Dazzling has probably a few more options to fill that battlefield slot, but outside of that, I mean, there was really no losses to Dazzling Aurora, and Volibear was already really good into mid-range Draven. You just basically were having a lot of struggle into the Miracle decks. All the Aurora, early on in testing, all the guys here can attest for this. I was playing a lot of Volibear, a lot of Master Yi Aurora, and trying to see if these decks could work in set 2, and I was really impressed with their spread and how much better they got. Volibear, of course, specifically got access to Ferris Forerunner, which is just like a really powerful card that you could just play on 6, and you don't have to de-ramp yourself, so you can still play an 8 cost unit the next turn and ramp again. So yeah, Volibear I felt like was really strong, but as soon as these miracles really started popping off, and I did a lot more testing into Miracle with these Aurora decks, I realized right away just how terrible of a matchup it was. They were putting Might on the board much faster than you and way more consistently than you. If once their engine actually went off, they could break here and there, but for the most part, you're a slow deck, so even if they are breaking, it's not like you can really capitalize on that, because they're going to have the time to eventually do their thing and draw through their whole deck because of how slow of a deck you are. So yeah, I think Volibear is a big winner. I would not be surprised to see it maybe finally making a pretty deep run. And yeah, I think Dazzling Aurora overall was a big winner. Any thoughts, Alex?
I do think Volibear is it's even got a lot of tools in set 2. Ferris Forerunner, huge upside for decks like Viktor that typically prey on Aurora decks. So I do think that Volibear got a lot of upside here, especially with these bans. I don't think it's the best Aurora deck, which we'll talk about that a little bit down the line, but having played a little bit of against a little bit of Volibear pre-bans even, it was a pretty formidable deck. I think the biggest thing that Volibear lacks compared to all the other Aurora decks is a consistency upper, so an extra way to draw cards, an extra way to ramp. But it unfortunately, Obelisk is banned now, but it still does have the deadly line of one of my favorite lines I've seen from Volibear is turn 2 Catalyst into turn 3 Dead Bloom into turn 4 Aurora. I think that line is incredible, and that's one no other deck can do because Volibear ramps off the Dead Bloom, so it stays at 7 and then gets to go to 9 for the Aurora. So that's a line I really like out of them. But I think Volibear is in contention to be one of the best Aurora decks because of Ferris Forerunner, because it has that extra option into decks like Viktor and to a lesser extent Reksai, where you do have blockers for things like Cold a Week and Hidden Blade. So I like Volibear. I think this is appropriate, and I think it is a higher B tier deck. I could even see by the end of the format, maybe it moves into the bottom of A tier. Wouldn't surprise me.
Collin, I know you lost to a Volibear in infamous fashion. What do you think about Volibear in the B tier?
Yeah, he's fine. I don't think there's much I can say about Aurora decks without coming off a little bit too salty. So I'll say they are where they are in the tier list, and let y'all cover those.
For sure. Yeah. I do think one last thing to note. I do think we got some clarification finally that basically confirms that the Stormbringer and Yone combo does actually work now. So they did resolve those things with a control of battlefield and things like that. So that is confirmed to work now. Not saying that necessarily is the way you need to go with Volibear. I think that, playing weaker units, you only want to be doing that so many times. I know we saw a lot of people playing, the multiple of the Minotaurs and Yones and Ferris and all this stuff, and I just don't know that you want to be like stockpiling your deck with 5 and 6 costs when you're trying to use Aurora. But I do think that that the Stormbringer Yone combo is really strong. I think it's probably less good now because Draven's probably going to fall off a bit. I think that was one of the main utilities for Yone. But yeah, we'll see. So next up, we've got the Nine-Tailed Fox Ahri. We should have an Ahri guide dropping on the Metafy very soon, coming from Daniel as well. We have pumped up Ahri up to the B tier now. I do think that Ahri has still a lot of good tricks. She's in a good color combo. And I think that a lot of the hold decks are no longer, cowering in fear as much as they were before, because you can actually maybe try to pull off a hold in Riftbound. And if you're doing holds, then I think that Ahri was really strong. I remember Collin playing me really early on in the set with like a Janna and Thwonk, just a very hold dominant Ahri deck that was pretty strong. And ultimately, I mean, we just realized, it couldn't really work in the face of some of these other decks. But I do think that the deck got probably moved up a little bit with a lot of these other decks falling down and Draven kind of falling off. What do you think, Collin? You played a lot of Ahri.
Yeah, it obviously is the middle card to chase for, so that was one of my interests with her. I think she's got some potential game, and with everything else getting weaker, that's where a lot of our legends here become a little bit more relevant in our minds, just because the playing field is evened out a little bit. That being said, I still think she struggles into a couple of key things, but overall, she's definitely in a much better spot than she was previously. So, given that she had a 0% miracle win rate, as did most of these decks. So, yeah, I think she'll be a fun one for people to play who like these blue-green hold style of decks, and hopefully you can just lock your opponents out from ever getting into the battlefield and win like that.
Yeah,
and I don't have much extra to add on that. I think her or domain combinations are some of the best. I said this in set 1 when I did our Ahri deck profile. I think the biggest thing holding Ahri back from true greatness is honestly her chosen champ and signature spellers options are kind of lacking. So I think if she does get a better signature spell, or she does get a better chosen champion in the future, I really could see this this legend kind of being even A tier maybe at some point. But other than that, yeah, I think everything that has to be said about her has kind of been said.
Next up, we've got Swift Scout Teemo. Teemo has been demoted back down to the C tier. Teemo was basically, we already talked about in the last tier list, just kind of a worse spot than Ezreal overall. Like, it could still do the miracle stuff. Teemo was one of like the original Rasa decks back in set 1 before we had all these cards, but with all the cards for the Miracles deck being destroyed now, and Teemo definitely having a worse chosen champ than Ezreal, plus lack of draw power, it still did get some cool hiddens, but it did lose Fight or Flight 2, which was one of the best hiddens in the game. So yeah, Teemo, while still not being quite Metal Card Side Quest because of the great color combo, along with like some pretty good tools that it does have, it is now back down to the C tier. Do you guys have any thoughts on Teemo's demotion?
No, I mean, I'd probably put him as like the very, very bottom of C tier based on everything that we have here. I think the Fight or Flight nerf or ban obviously hurt him quite considerably. But there are still about 1.5 million good hidden options for him. And honestly, a lot of the hiddens are situationally even better than Fight or Flight. Fight or Flight was more for the utility of being able to do a million things with that one card, whereas Teemo is kind of like a linear enough deck that he's just trying to hold with his hidden stuff that he didn't necessarily need that effect. It's often stronger to just like, if you're going to be paying the 1 energy for it anyways, you might as well play a Switcheroo as like a 2 power cost card that you're getting for only 1 energy, as opposed to Fight or Flight, which was not nearly as strong. So I do think obviously that nerf hurt him a little bit, but he still has plenty of other options. So I think he'll be quite all right.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same camp here. I think Fight or Flight, just like Teemo catching strays, losing it one of its best hidden cards. I mean, I've never really been like a huge Teemo fan. Like I was in set one for a little bit, but I just think there's not really a reason to play this over Ezreal right now. I think as the pool of hiddens gets larger, I could see this coming back up, but I think I agree with Colin that like this very well could have been in the metal card side quest, and I probably wouldn't have taken a second look at it.
For sure.
Next up, we've got the Herald of the Arcane, Viktor. Viktor basically losing nothing from this tier list other than the Obelisk of Power. So Viktor was, at least in set one of the early adopters of using Obelisk going first to be able to play a 2-drop plus a token. And, you know, given that everybody in set 2 was playing Obelisk going second, they were all giving Viktor this 2-drop plus a token play when going first as well. So, I mean, he was really enjoying everybody having an Obelisk. But I still think that the deck's really strong. This color combo is really good into Irelia, really good into Aurora. I mean, this deck has been consistently good into those two decks, and I think that those are two of the biggest winners from the ban list. So it just kind of positions Viktor in a really good spot, on top of Viktor already being like a really solid deck. I mean, this deck just produces free bodies that can score points, and you don't care if you're losing them because you're not actually losing cards. Bellows plus the Imperial Decree is obviously an insane combination. You still have access to Watcher and all the other really strong things that Viktor was doing. I think that Viktor is a major winner, and we have decided to put it up into the A tier. I know Alex played a lot of Viktor in set one. Alex, why don't you talk to us a bit about Viktor?
Yeah, so Viktor is arguably the biggest winner, I think, here from this ban list. It was already a card that was kind of in contention before. We saw it make top cut in Bologna. It was doing very well at some of the China events, not in mass quantity, but like it was always in top cut in some number of representation. And I think Viktor's biggest upside is now that Irelia is looking a lot better. I think one of the best counters to Irelia is Viktor and these yellow decks, and it kind of has all the best control utility in the game. It has spot removal in the form of Hidden Blade, in the form of Cold a Week, which also gets around Deflect in Cole's case. It has access to board wipes in the form of Bellows Breath plus Imperial Decree or Bellows Breath plus Watcher. So it's like able to attack. It's a control deck that can kind of attack any situation from multiple different dimensions, or just Imperial Decree with wide boards. I think it can double as a mid-range deck too, where like it was in set one, where we see more creature-heavy Viktor decks. Like I think this is just a very multi-dimensional deck. It can be built numerous ways, and I think now, especially now that Miracles is gone, this deck and Draven to some extent as well, this deck just has improved drastically. I think this is one of the biggest winners here, and I think it's going to be something you're going to have to consider when building any sort of deck going into this new meta.
Colin, any thoughts on Viktor?
Yeah, I do think that a lot of what Alex said rung true. For Viktor, I do think that a lot of people thought he had a good Draven matchup. I promise you he didn't. It was atrocious, and I think that was what kept him down a lot. So, yeah, I think going into this new field, there's a lot of variations of Viktor that we can try that is just, being able to consistently put up bodies that score points for free is a very strong effect, and it lets you play some of the most efficient removal available. Imperial Decree plus Bellows Breath is still untouched, so that combination is going to be problematic for as long as it's legal, pretty much. So, yeah, I think he'll be a good deck and a top contender for sure moving forward.
Next up, we've got Bounty Hunter Misfortune. We've decided to put Misfortune down into the B tier. We did have Dazzling Aurora, as we mentioned, is not really a loser from the ban list. However, Purple Dazzling Aurora is a bit of a loser. We did lose Called Shot on top of the Obelisk, so a lot of these Sivir and MF decks had this additional consistency upper in Called Shot, and while it did lead to some, basically win or lose situations of if you're playing off your Called Shots and you don't find the Aurora, you just automatically lose. The amount of consistency of actually being able to play your Aurora on turn 3 was just so much higher that when the deck did go off, it just felt near unbeatable, especially with them being able to be so consistent that they were able to really cut a lot of creatures and just go down to just Mind Splitters and a couple of other bombs. But yeah, losing Cold Shot, it just kind of goes back to where it was. It's still a strong deck. It's still Dazzling Aurora. It still has Mind Splitter, which is an insane card to hit off of Aurora. And you still have Ganking, which is, of course, really powerful. One of the best things that Aurora decks could ever ask for is Ganking. But yeah, just losing the consistency just kind of makes her a little bit worse, in my opinion. And I do think that Volibear is definitely a bit better of an Aurora deck because, again, we mentioned, I think Viktor was one of the big winners. I think Order was just kind of one of the big winners because it has the tools that it needs to not only deal with the Aurora decks, but the Irelia decks. And MF doesn't really have anything to do into those decks. MF is really all in on the Aurora plan, especially if you're playing this like really low creature count version, and you are just going to get mopped up by any deck playing like Call the Weak, Bellows Breath, Imperial Decree, or even just Imperial Decree alone, honestly. Like, it's just kind of a tough spot for the Chaos Aurora decks nowadays to try to pull off what they were doing before without the called shots. Any thoughts, guys? Alex?
I think for me, one of the biggest things is MF. They did lose Fight or Flight too, which is not an essential card in this deck, but they did play Fight or Flight.
Very true. Yeah.
One thing I will note about, I'll note two things. One, I think Mind Splitter is still one of the best things you can pull out of Aurora. Two, I think that I still really like the idea of this this low creature shovel deck, so that you can just kind of cut out all the bricks and like ideally you're just using the last rites to keep putting creatures back in your deck, conquer, bring them back from bin, and just like keep churning out Mind Splitters over and over again. So that is one place that I do think that this purple Aurora deck could end up being the better of the three Aurora decks. I think it's something that it does do more effectively, but I agree with all of Anton's points that it did lose the Call Shot, which is a huge consistency upper. It lost Obelisk, which all Aurora decks lost. It lost Fight or Flight, which I actually think is the least of its concerns, but still, it's still losing something. Like, it's something that was in the deck that's now going to have to be replaced by something that is lesser. So I do think this is appropriate, though, in B tier, but I could see this potentially pushing past Volley. I could see a world where maybe the shovel becomes too overwhelming for Viktor to deal with, being able to just shovel guys back into your deck, no pun intended. So yeah, I still think this is fine. I still think it's the best of Aurora decks, of the Aurora color combinations available right now. The ganking's still great. You have a decent chosen champ. So yeah, I think this deck is still fine by all means. I just think that the Cold Shot loss definitely hurts.
Yeah, Aurora deck's still Aurora deck. That's
Colin's thoughts on Aurora.
most of it.
You can
Yeah,
feel
exactly.
the seething anger.
This man really wanted that card on the list, chat. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Yes. I will yeah, rant about it plenty, but yeah, I do not think that card is very fun.
Don't worry, Aurora players. Don't let the non-Aurora players at your local convince you you're small brain because you spin the wheel every turn. That's actually the biggest brain decision you can make, is spinning the wheel.
Facts.
Don't let them tell you otherwise.
All right. Next up, we've got Dark Child Annie. We have pushed Annie up into the B tier. Of course, I still think Annie is a big loser. Lost the Scrap Heap. Lost the Dreaming Tree if you were looking at like the older Annie versions or even the mid-range versions. Fight or Flight, of course, is a huge loss for Annie. She was always capable of leaving that up. That was one of her best tricks, just being able to burn points or prevent combats for free, not having to set it either or have to commit it to a battlefield because you just always had that energy up. So yeah, I think Annie is still powerful, only going to get more powerful as time goes on because its effect is insane. But in the current format, we've decided to throw it into B tier, definitely below Draven. Any thoughts on Annie's position, Colin?
Yeah, I mean, she is just another red-purple legend, which is a pretty strong domain, but obviously the nerfs are going to hurt her quite a bit. I could see Annie going back to the previous strategy of just being hyper aggro and abusing the untap 2 to try and push for game early, especially going into a Aurora dominant metagame. I think she's definitely put herself into a spot where she can play around that with enough rebukes, enough early pressure, and by the wind is more of a consideration in my mind now, more so than ever, given that purple will not be as prevalent, hopefully, given all the bans to it. So yeah, I think she'll be a solid aggressive deck, or you can kind of still maybe do the Draven cosplay thing if you want, of playing like a solid mid-range list. But without Fight or Flight, it's definitely a lot tougher.
Yeah, she might even arguably have a better chosen champ than Draven now.
Yeah,
True.
I think too. My biggest issue with Annie, and I had an Annie player that we're friends with messaging me today, and he was concerned that there's no draw engine left in Andy, and I think he was suggesting the guy. He's like a 5 or 6 drop that draws a card anytime that you choose one of your guys with a spell, because there's just no way to draw with this deck left, and I think that's one of the biggest issues. Yeah, Jay Medarda. Yeah. So I think one of the biggest issues is 2 games you had a draw engine, and the 3rd game you had Arena's Greatest, so you're just a full aggro deck, and now you've lost both of these things, or 2 out of 3 of these things, rather. So I think that Annie could easily end up in the top of C tier. I don't think the Draven cosplay element is in the cards for her anymore, because the lack of Fight or Flight. Like, Fight or Flight was very essential to that strategy, and she also did play Draven Vanquisher in the main deck. So I think that option might be lost to her. I think she could still be a solid aggro deck. All that being said, I think right now bottom of B tier is pretty fair. She has still been pretty good. She was one of the best, if not the best, legend in set 1. And I don't think she's fallen that far from grace, maybe, but I could be wrong here, and maybe just the draw engine loss is just too much for her to handle. So like I said, I could easily see this being C tier, but yeah, I think for now bottom of B is more appropriate.
Next up, we've got my favorite, as you all know, the Wuju Bladesman Master Yi. I'm not going to be talking about mid-range too much, though I do think that mid-range is a viable strategy. I do think that the best way to be playing this legend is the same way I've been saying since set 1, which is as an Aurora deck. Yi didn't really lose anything. I mean, of course, we lost Obelisk, like we said, but outside of that, I mean, everything else that this deck is doing is still the same. I was able to pilot the Yi deck in set 2 format with before the ban list, and was still able to come to a really strong finish in Las Vegas, of course. And I do think that it's only, with Draven falling off, it's just only gotten so much better. Fight or Flight was such a pain in the butt for Aurora decks too. Like, just hated that card. So I mean, while I'm still not happy that there's rebukes, and obviously in set 3 we know there's tons more rebukes coming right now, if we're just focusing on the current format, there's only really rebuke now. Like, Fight or Flight is one of the main cards that dealt with big units, and now it's just basically rebuke. Switcheroo is an option as well, but it does cost a lot of power. So if your only options are all costing you 2 power, and I can stop that with a not so fast and make you go down 2 lands, then I'm in a pretty good spot. So Fight or Flight is being gone is definitely also a big win for the Aurora decks, and I actually do think that Master Yi is up in the A tier. I don't believe it's quite the top of A tier. I do still think there are strategies like the yellow decks that can really prey on you. Like, Viktor's still going to be a really tough matchup no matter what. There is a few other bad matchups. You have like Lucian, but really, I mean, I think overall it's looking like it's in a really, really strong spot. You have access to not so fast, unlike set 1. You still have Zhonya's, you still have all the really strong stuff you were doing. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the deck now, so even more with the bans. I would not be shocked to see me playing this in Leal or Atlanta. Collin, I'm sure, has already said his thoughts on Aurora, but Alex, any thoughts? You did play a good bit of Yi Aurora in set 1.
Yeah, so I think Yi Aurora, in my mind, is one of the biggest winners here. I think one of the things truly holding Aurora decks back was the Miracles deck, not so much the Draven deck. And I think we discussed that a little bit earlier, but I do think that with the absence of Miracles, all these decks get to kind of come out and play these Aurora decks. And I think this is probably the most consistent one in that it operates the best when you don't see Aurora compared to the other two, like Volibear and MF. I think MF probably operates the worst when it doesn't see Aurora, but Volibear is also pretty not great when it doesn't see Aurora. But I think this deck is actually just like, at best, it's a very good Aurora deck. At the worst, it's just a solid Yi mid-range deck. You're just playing the top end of Yi mid-range. And I mean, I'll be real with you, like Dead Bloom coming in and then having deflect and blocking for 10 by itself is still as awful as it was to play against before as it is now. So yeah, I think this is solid. It got some new tricks. Not so fast is a huge one for this deck, having a real stop to rebuke so we don't have to side wind wall anymore. God bless. So I do think that this deck is gotten a lot better. It's even got outs now. It's got more counters for the Viktor deck in the form of that not so fast. And you can even side wind wall if you're worried about stuff like Imperial Decree still. So I think this deck improved drastically. I think too, now that we probably don't have to side 6 2-drop units for that transformational sideboard for Annie. Now we've got a real sideboard and we can use that space accordingly. So I'm a big fan of Yi. I think this was also one of the biggest winners here out of this ban list for Yi Aurora. I'm not quite a believer in Yi mid range just yet, but maybe there's some room for something there. But yeah, I think Yi stocks are pretty high. Yi Aurora stocks are pretty high right now, and there's a good chance that's the deck you're going to see me showing up with. I know it's probably Anton too at the next event. So.
Speaking of which, we have a half-price guide going right now for Set 2 Yi Aurora, and I will be updating once we do some more testing with the new matchups going into the next event. So be on the lookout for that, and go check out that guide if you're interested.
For sure. We've
got Lucian next. Lucian. Oh, one last thing I wanted to note about Yi before we move into Lucian is also that while Yi does have the issue with into the yellow decks, remember that the Sand Soldiers actually made a huge deal into Viktor. So Desert's Call actually really not only helps you play around Call the Weak, but I don't know if you know this, but Viktor cannot swing into 4-might defenders. Like, that is a near impossible mission for Viktor decks. So yeah, the Desert's Call made a really big deal into Viktor as well.
For sure.
Next up we have Lucian. Speaking of one of the bad matchups for Aurora decks, I do believe equipment decks in general, and Lucian is one of the best equipment decks on top of making all of your equipment swing in for big numbers. We have Lucian in the B tier. I do think that this deck is really strong. The combo is still really strong and can just like win the games from spots out of nowhere. You've got access to Ride the Wind. And yeah, you're just swinging in for like really, really big numbers, which Aurora decks really can't handle. Irelia also struggles into that a bit. So yeah, I think that Lucian's in a spot where, while it is a little bit inconsistent with its lack of card draw, I think it's positioned kind of well in the format with how things are looking. Any thoughts, Collin, on Lucian?
Yeah, I do think that he has one of the best chosen champs available, even while going second, which is quite nice in order to fill that gap, as the Lucian is able to score points pretty safely while still triggering all of your conquer effects, like your Triforces, your Bone Splitters, all that sort of stuff. So I think he is like a decently solid deck. He has a few consistency issues, and if he's ever like falls behind on points, then he puts himself in a really bad spot just because he doesn't have any ability to hold. But he is one of the best decks at breaking into battlefields. So if the metagame ends up being a lot slower, i.e. these Aurora decks, and you're just kind of able to set up your combo, then Lucian is quite good. And if not, then obviously the deck falls apart. But hopefully that doesn't end up being the case for you, should you decide to play Lucian. And yeah, I think it's a solid deck, kind of in this mid-tier that we're seeing a lot of decks. But I do think that a lot of it really was just that Draven was so far above and beyond everything else with all the tools that they had access to, that so many decks just couldn't exist so long as Draven existed. So hopefully this ban list does what we're thinking it will and makes a lot of these decks a lot more viable.
Alex, any thoughts?
I still think Lucian is a bit of a glass cannon deck. I'm not like a massive hater of Lucian by any means, but I just think if you are playing the combo version, which in my opinion is the best version, you are a little glass cannon-y. You do need to find these cards in a deck that doesn't have a whole lot of draw power. You can't even abuse the Warmog's draw engine with the Monastery anymore if that was something you were doing prior to the rules update. I just think that I think this deck is a little too all in for my taste and not consistent enough to go along with that all inness. So I also think this deck, if you are playing the combo version, you fold the Thermo Beam a lot. That being said, you do have one of the best 3-cost chosen champs in the game. It is the best 3-cost chosen champ in the game, I would say. I think Lucian is arguably one of the best 3-cost units in the game. So I think that's really good for it. I think next set and set 3, there's a little bit more to talk about with this deck, but I just think right now at bottom of B tier is probably appropriate. It still does do some very explosive things when you see the combo and you have the Relentless Pursuit. I mean, you can just almost straight kill them from nothing, depending on how many pieces you have, how many Triforces you have. So I do think a deck with this level of explosiveness, it's hard to put it anywhere lower than B, but this is a deck that I could easily see falling into C tier. It is a deck I also think is very vulnerable to cards like Falling Star, to spot removal, because it isn't necessarily like it can be a go wide deck sometimes, but not always, because it's spending so much time playing weapons. So I think this deck is fine. It's just not really my style of deck personally.
Makes sense to me. Speaking of a deck that is more Alex's style, we've got the Void Burrow Reksai. I do think Reksai was a pretty big winner as well. You know, not really anything touched from Reksai, honestly. And I already thought this legend was doing something pretty strong. We did put Reksai into B tier. I think it's probably definitely in the higher end of B tier. And Alex was mentioning that he could even potentially seeing it be very low A. Alex, why don't you tell us what your thoughts on Reksai is in the new format?
So at least the build of Reksai that I play, it did lose the Draven Vanquisher, which is a hit, but I wasn't even playing that in the original build. It was a big upgrade to the deck, but I think now that all these other decks got hit, you can very much live without it. The big selling points of at least my version of Reksai are this. One, you're very good into the Irelia deck. At Bologna, I think it was 8-0 in games versus Irelia in the main event. I beat, and some of them were close. It wasn't blowout games by any means, but I think this deck is very, very good in Irelia, especially game 2 when you get things like Imperial Decree, when you get things like Salvage, when you get things like Thermo Beam. So you have a lot of upside, especially you have a lot of utility totals, especially in the side against decks like that. I think your biggest issue, the arch nemesis of this deck, I've said it time and time again, is Ferris Forerunner. But if you remove the Draven decks, remove the Annie decks, well, that's 2 decks. Those are the primary Ferris Forerunner abusers. And even the decks like Volibear that can use Ferris Forerunner to some extent. Ferris Forerunner is actually the best answer to Ferris Forerunner right now. So when they don't have Rebuke or these cards like Fight or Flight that invalidate combat or just bounce your Ferris Forerunner back, you can use Ferris Forerunner reasonably to beat Ferris Forerunner. I do think some parts where this deck is going to suffer is that the Kaisa decks get to kind of reformat into a not so spell removal heavy version, which is going to make this a little bit more difficult when they're using real creatures like Darius, when they're maining Ferris Forerunners. But I do think Reksai is one of the bigger winners here. It's got a great Aurora matchup, not an incredible one, but a good one. It's got a very good matchup into a lot of these chaff decks, as I call them. These decks that were kind of chaffy in nature before. Some like decks like Ezreal. I know that's not such a chaff deck, but it wasn't such a chaff deck. Maybe now it's more of a chaff deck. But I just think this deck is kind of very well positioned. I think mid top of B tier, but I could easily see this deck going up to bottom of A tier. I know there's a go wide version that won best of in Vegas, and I haven't played enough with that version to be able to comment on it enough, but I do think that version could potentially be viable too. Maybe that's better than the Phoenix version now. It's really hard to say. It's something I'll be testing a lot in these next coming days, kind of seeing where Reksai is, but I have a lot of faith. This deck didn't really get hit a whole lot, like I said, just the Draven, and that can easily be played without, so we'll see where it goes. I'm happy. I'm looking forward to the future for Reksai.
Collin, any thoughts?
No, I think Alex covered it pretty well. I think Reksai is looking to be pretty strong, so definitely a top contender for sure, and something that even I'll be trying out in this new meta, given the potential meta game that we're expecting.
Yeah, I do know, given that we already put Viktor so high on the tier list, every time I ever, Cody, one of our best of Victors on our team, said, like, as soon as he queued into a Reksai, he's like, I played a Reksai. How do I beat that? So, I mean, if Reksai's beating Irelia, if it's beating Viktor, and if it has a playable Aurora matchup, like, yeah, I mean, there might be a pretty strong case for what Alex was saying, that this may even actually be a lower A tier contender for sure. Next up, we've got Ornn. Ornn was not anyone who lost anything in this ban list, but obviously Ornn had a few major issues before, the main one being Bryn here, which was untouched. But I do think that with red kind of falling off, given that a lot of these legends have now been bumped down a bit, there's a potential for Ornn to move into the format as a real contender. We have put Ornn at the bottom of B tier, more than likely, in my mind at least. He's probably closer to C, but we did think that Ornn still does do some pretty impressive things, especially if it gets going and you can't really stop it. Collin, I know you played a lot of Ornn early on in testing. What are your thoughts on Ornn's position coming into the post-ban list format?
Yeah, I think it's just a very solid deck that does the thing and it does it well. His previous issue was having a functional 0% win rate into Draven, and that still will be the case moving forward. That being said, Draven will be a lot less prevalent, so it just gives Ornn a little bit more breathing room to potentially exist, assuming that you can dodge those bad matchups. So Viktor is also a really bad matchup for him, so maybe you're right. Maybe he should probably be in like the C tierish range. But yeah, it's just a very much so like a lock your opponent out of the game style of deck. Once he gets set up, there's nothing they can do. They just lose. If you can do that in time and your opponent's not applying enough pressure, then Ornn will completely shut them out. Otherwise, Bryn here is obviously the card that really always puts too much pressure on the Ornn strategy and completely invalidates him, at least in the current set. So he's definitely either at the bottom of B or top of C, just because what he's doing is so inherently powerful. But it's more about what your opponent is doing to stop you more so than anything else. Because if they don't have something to get around the lock, then you're just going to win the game automatically, right? So yeah, solid deck for sure.
I think my biggest issue with Ornn is kind of what Colin said, is that this deck could never beat Draven, but more importantly, can't beat certain color combinations. So it's Bryn here, purple, and now you have less outs, right? Because you don't have fight or flight, so you can't go Bryn here, fight or flight, push him out, score the last 2 points you need. You still do have Rebuke, though. You still do have Switcheroo. You still do have these things that just like let you win the fight, so to speak. And then against actually Reksai, funny enough, they have Bryn here plus Cold the Weak, or Bryn here plus Hidden Blade. So these are other issues where these color combinations that can play Bryn here and then have some sort of absolute like way to just like address him are a real issue. And then even those that don't can sometimes, if you don't have like a spell or songer plus enough of the equips in the back, sometimes they can just kill you through pure might. Like they can just watcher you with a bunch of dudes. If you're playing against Kaisa, they can just go to the other side and time warp you for game if you don't have Wind Wall. Especially if you do have to kind of tap out in some manner. Like I do think that this deck improved leaps and bounds from where it was, and I'm actually of the opposite opinion, where I could see this being higher in B tier. To be honest, my issue is just that I think Bryn here will continue to be a dominant force in this meta, and I do think that is one of the biggest issues that he has. I think the other one being that he does need to see Speller Songer in a timely manner, and I think that does cause issues for him. Even Viktor can cause problems where they play Imperial Decree, and if you don't have the Wind Wall, they're just going to run over you. So I just think that too many decks that have moved up in this tier list have ways to deal with him super well, even if a lot of his worst matchups are kind of now gone. So I could see him moving up for sure. I am hopeful for him, but I do still kind of see the cracks here. I even versus Kaisa, which I think should be one of his best matchups. I can see where Time Warp still creates this issue where they have 2 Time Warps and they just win the game that way. So
yeah, I will just say that he is the type of deck that can never be the best deck. Just because if they want to, they can always just slam a bunch of Bryn here, slam a bunch of Time Warps, whatever it may be. There's a bunch of gear hate, all that sort of stuff. So I'll never see him above B tier, but he'll always kind of be in this B to C tier range as like a anti-meta deck. If you think it's the right call, then definitely slam some more in.
Yeah, I would say based on everything that you guys just said and my assessment, this guy should not be in B tier, but that's okay. We'll put him there for the fans. Next up, we've got Kaisa. Do believe Kaisa is still solidly in A tier. This deck did not lose too much, didn't really gain too much. Obviously, Dreaming Tree is kind of a hit, depending on if you were playing like the old mid-rangey version of Kaisa. And Kaisa was playing Obelisk, but again, all of us were playing Obelisk. We've addressed this many times, and that wasn't specifically a thing that Kaisa really needed. She wasn't playing that in set 1 at all. Reaver's Row is a bit of a hit. She was playing Reavers as well. So basically all of the battlefields that were banned were used in Kaisa in either set 1 or set 2. So she's definitely going to struggle probably a bit in finding some new battlefields. But other than that, I mean, all the things that Kaisa is doing are really strong. She did gain new tools in set 2, like Ferris Forerunner, which is just an excellent card overall and gives you a lot of game into the yellow decks. So yeah, I still think Kaisa's obviously doing something that's really powerful. She still has access to some of the most powerful spells in the game at a much cheaper power cost than everybody else. And I think she's still going to be a powerful deck that, in the format. Obviously, with Aurora being more powerful because it didn't lose anything, that's obviously not a matchup that Kaisa is a fan of either. So there will still be some matchups in the format that she definitely doesn't want to queue into. Any thoughts on Kaisa in A tier, Collin?
Yeah, I think we've got like kind of a weird matchup triangle up here at the top where Kaisa kind of beats up on Viktor, Viktor beats up on Aurora, and Aurora beats up on Kaisa. I will say that Kaisa does have a little bit of a better better win rate into all of these like B, C, and middle card side quest tier legends. She historically has been one of the reasons why all of these legends are so far down, because if you can't answer a falling star, or you can't answer a singularity, then Kaisa just gets to win the game for free. So that's why she's always been as dominant as she has, and she still will continue to be quite strong. We'll just have to see what variation of Kaisa ends up going to the front, given that Aurora is expected to be one of the best, if not the best deck in this new metagame. But I think she'll always find some way to adapt and make things work, at least given her historic success.
Alex, any thoughts?
No, I think that's a pretty fair assumption. I think Kaisa's biggest flaw right now is just going to be Irelia. I think this deck is going to have a very, very hard time beating Irelia, and I think that's going to be one of her biggest obstacles to overcome. Aurora as well can be a hard one, but I think she can adjust better to Aurora than she might be able to into Irelia. Time will kind of tell how this deck adapts. I do think it's going to go back to a more creature-oriented version with Darius's, with Ferris's are probably going to be in the main now. Just a little less removal heavy than it may have been in the past, because I think those strategies are not going to work nearly as well. Her removal does not line up nearly as well with decks like Viktor, with decks like Aurora, so I can potentially see some sort of reversion to the old version, reverting to the old versions. But yeah, I agree with most of what you guys had to say about her otherwise. I think she's just probably a deck that's going to be A tier for time to come.
And next up, we have Jax, Grandmaster of Arms. Jax notably did make top 8 in Vegas. This has crawled its way out of Metal Card Side Quest. We had it in Metal Card Side Quest before, however, we were not aware when we were making those tier lists of exactly the Jax ruling. There we got a conflicting ruling where there was a Jax FAQ ruling in America that said that Jax could re-equip weapons to the same targets. And then in China, apparently it was ruled that you couldn't do that. And it seems like after some deliberation, Riot did officially announce today, along with the ban list, some rules updates, and one of those rules updates was that interaction no longer works that way anymore. Unfortunately, Alex is still salting about that a bit, as he was writing a Jax guide, basically wrote a Jax guide, and it's kind of a moot. Most of the points in that guide are moot now because of this ruling interaction. I do believe that this was a pretty significant nerf to Jax. However, we do still believe that after testing with the deck a good bit, that it still might have some C tier contention. It still does do a few interesting things. So we did drop it into the C tier. It did claw its way out of Metal Card. But Alex, what are your thoughts on Jax in the new format? Obviously, the new changes did affect him a lot.
I mean, look at how they massacred my boy. It's a travesty. The ruling change that he could not re-equip to re-trigger the Brutalize of Felios wasn't enough. They also made it now so that costs have to be paid up front. So if you, one of the main draw engines in this deck was game 1, you would have Monastery of Hirana, and you would put a Warmog's armor on a guy, you'd go Conquer. You could layer it before so that you could gain the counter and then pay to draw 1. You can't even do that anymore. So they kicked my boy while he was down, had absolutely no mercy. And C tier is probably, given that the Monastery ruling on top of the re-equip ruling, C tier is probably being generous. I have a soft spot, so when they asked me, I said C tier. Like, he does still do some cool stuff, but he's not going to look anything like he does now. But yes, this guy could just easily be back to Metal Card side quest. I don't think he ever gets his way out of C tier at best. It just what Riot did to him is such a travesty. They said, I think their exact words were, the Jax ruling was a glitch that's been patched now. Man, what the fuck? Just looking at, seeing this in the tier list as we were doing this video, I was like, man, I don't even want to think about this anymore. It's so disheartening. I spent so many hours practicing this, I'm not even going to get into it. It's going to make me more upset. But just know, Jax is C tier at best. He's probably a Metal Card leader now. It's so sad because I think this could have shaped up to be had they not changed both these rulings, I think this would have been a high B tier, maybe even a bottom A tier leader. He was very fair, even in his best form, but I think he didn't have any really bad matchups, and he didn't have any really great matchups. He was like a 60-40 deck across the board, and I was a big fan of that. So it's unfortunate that that they had to do this to him, but yeah.
Collin, any thoughts?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that Jax definitely got absolutely gutted, so I think it's a travesty, but, maybe there'll still be some playability for him moving forward. We'll just have to see exactly where he ends up at the end of it. But obviously, we've been testing it with his entire deck functioning a certain way. So having to see how playable he is after that significant nerf is going to be tough. It's just very hard to evaluate, as every other deck has some sort of replacement for the cards. Like you can play more Rebukes and Switcheroos to answer instead of your Fight or Flights. But Jax doesn't really have an alternative to his legend being completely changed. So, yeah.
And next up, we've got Azir, Emperor of the Sands. Azir, we still did place into the C tier. I do think that this deck has solid matchup into Aurora, so that is something to consider. We'll probably have it in higher up C tier. But I do think that the deck still has some glaring weaknesses. I mean, obviously, you can hate it out with things like Thermo Beam. It's not really drawing cards. It doesn't have a lot of consistency to it. I know from watching a lot of Azir games in Vegas and on streams and stuff, there are just so many times where I've seen an Azir player only draw one equipment for multiple turns, and they just don't have guys to play. They just are drawing all their other spells, and they're just they really need equipments to keep going, and then they'll draw all their sig spells. I think I saw a game where some guy had all 3 Arises in their hand. I think this might have been on a China stream, but the guy had 2 or 3 Arises in his hand and only 1 equipment on the board all game, and it was just oh my god, this deck really needs some draw power or some consistency uppers or something. But yeah, I do think that the deck is still definitely better than Metal Card Side Quest. Any thoughts on Azir, Alex?
No, I think it could be B tier. I've seen this deck do somewhat well. My issues with this deck are more just that it's the thing I hate about this deck. Every time I see it is every deck list is exactly the same, and I understand that's just a product of what this deck does, but it feels like there's very low room for innovation in this deck. That's more, I guess, a personal pet peeve of mine than it is like an actual criticism of the deck itself. But yes, I do think this deck is good, maybe a little bit better than you might be giving it credit for. I think it's not quite as good as Viktor, but I think in terms of like go wide token spam, I think this is a pretty solid deck, especially given that its tokens are a baseline 2/2 or 2 might rather. So I like Azir. I think it has a place. I think it's decent into Aurora. I think there's a place for it in the meta, but I do agree that like it's probably bottom of B tier, high C tier at best.
Yeah, I would just say that like this deck is kind of a quintessential, very fair deck. It doesn't have anything inherently broken that it's doing, which is why it is always going to be in this like B to C tier range. It's just playing dudes that are very efficient, but none of them are super tricksy. The only thing you have is your chosen champion that can kind of one time send all of your tokens in from one side to the other. But that's really all it has in terms of tricks. And while you're playing like this super fair strategy, you also just randomly lose to a card like Thermo Beam if they decide to play it. So yeah, I think that's why Azir has tended to struggle, and you'll never see it quite at the very, very top. But I do think it kind of goes into this middling range between B and C tier as like a pretty fine deck if that's your style. It does some stuff that's unique, and that's all that you can really ask of a deck in Riftbound, right?
True. All right, guys. Next up, the fall from grace is real. I mean, in my opinion, I've been waiting to put him back there. Y'all know I didn't think he should have been there in the first place, but we're talking about Ezreal. We had him at A tier in the last tier list, and now he is back where he belongs in the C tier. Obviously, Ezreal was a major loser of this one as well, losing Cold Shot. Cold Shot was a really powerful card for this deck. It was one of the main things that the deck was doing. You still do have Ezreal Chosen Champ, which obviously makes you better than Teemo just by default, but you lost the scrap heaps too. I mean, not all Ezreals were playing heap, but either way, you lost heap if you were doing that. Yeah, just overall, the Cold Shot really hurt this deck. You still do have draw power. It's still a good color combo. I do think some control deck can still exist out of Ezreal, and you just are doing more fair things and actually like having to target two things to draw your cards rather than just being able to Cold Shot and dig through your whole deck. Collin, you've played some Ezreal lately. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, he honestly, his entire deck was almost like a combo deck because all of his removal was things that you had to kind of glue together, which is why you really need the call shots to make your Bella's Breath work with the Frigid Touch, or make your Bella's Breath work with the Thousand-Tailed Watcher, or your Arcane Shift to work with your Arcane, your Fizzes and your Thousand-Tailed Watchers, and you're just really trying to filter through your deck as quickly as possible to set up these combos that would just wipe your opponent's board and let you win at each battlefield while they don't have any units to ever possibly contest you. So the loss of Called Shot will definitely hurt this deck, more so than any other, with the exception of Miracle, obviously. So yeah, I think he's like Anton said, he was kind of the type of deck that preyed on people not understanding what the deck was trying to do and playing very poorly into it, in my opinion. And he realistically was never that good of a deck. He just kind of was in the right position in the right time where nobody had any real games into it to understand it. But obviously we saw it fall off pretty quickly since then, and I don't expect Ezreal to be doing a whole lot. That being said, Called Shot was just like a consistency enabler. It didn't do anything inherently broken. So all the stuff that you're doing before, you can do again, with the exception of they also changed the Vex ruling with the Ezreal in order to make it so that you can't reduce a Bella's Breath to be completely free. You'll still have to pay the 1 energy for it, which is minor in the grand scheme of things, but may end up coming up occasionally, and is just a little bit more intuitive as to how it works. So I do think that without the consistency uppers, he will struggle a lot. But like I said, the thing that he was doing before, he can still 100% do now. He just has to do it a little bit less consistently.
Alex, any thoughts?
Yeah, fire up those Twitter fingers, Ezreal lovers, because boy, do we have a prize for you. It's a big fat L. There you go, Ezreal players. Right where he belongs. You can hold this L back in C tier. Yeah, Ezreal's an absolute fucking loser after this ban list. Like the called shot ban, skeet skeet, like that's out of here. I do think, funny enough, he didn't really get hit by anything else. Didn't really need fight or flight or like require that to play, but that is an option removed from him. All of these battlefields he actually didn't use. He managed to dodge that, but I think the called shot loss is just massive.
I think he did use Obelisk.
This deck works. Did it use Obelisk?
I think some of them
okay,
did,
so Obelisk, but whatever, sure. Small
everybody
loss,
again,
deal,
right? Everybody.
Yes, everybody. This deck barely crept its way out of C tier, and it's really just one guy who did it. This deck was always in my mind. It was probably B tier realistically, but now you guys can officially hold this L. Here you go, guys. Back to C tier. I hope to see some angry Twitter posts about it later, but you guys have heard it here first. Ezreal, C tier, get used to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of the thing too with Alan winning with the list was exactly what Collin said, of just people didn't understand the Vex ruling, which has also been changed. So like the Vex ruling that allowed this leader to win a regional in the first place has been reverted. And as we saw, as soon as more people got used to the list and more used to playing against it, it started basically converting a lot less. So yeah, I mean, not too surprising to see this guy drop down. Next up, we've got Sivir. I do believe Sivir, just like MF, lost the called shot. Sivir obviously was able to utilize called shot a little bit better than MF because of the gold. But yeah, losing your consistency upper and basically killing the Sivir Miracle deck basically only leaves Sivir with the option of being a purple Aurora deck and is strictly a worse purple Aurora deck than MF. That being said, I do still think that the Aurora and Mind Splitter combo is powerful enough that this definitely warrants being in the B tier, but probably much deeper on the lower on the list than MF. Collin's basically given his thoughts on Aurora, unless he has anything else to add.
Yeah, I'll just say that like we've seen a few oddities of Sivir Aurora decks, which is why I think she's still like kind of in a similar-ish thing with being able to play like I think Vero, who is a big Aurora player of these colors, has been like trying to play some Yones in there and just play it as like more of a mid-range thing, kind of similar to how Volley is able to continually play his units over the course of the turns leading up to the Aurora. Sivir's able to do something a little bit similar. Just because she's able to produce this gold that can allow you to play these, especially if you use like treasure troves and all that sort of stuff. So there's a little bit enough there that can make her a little bit different. But she probably is just going to have to be an Aurora deck at this point, as especially without fight or flight. I don't think this color combination can do much else.
I do think I wanted Sivir lower. I just think this is a worse MF deck. I'm not a fan of Sivir. I just don't think this. I've always felt this legend ability is kind of useless, and the chosen champ functions in a similar manner to MF's chosen champ. So I've always thought this was a bad MF, even if the legend itself does something a little different. But I just like MF better, even as a mid range deck. I honestly prefer MF to this. So I'm not a big fan of this right now. I think this could be like high C, not to be confused with the drink high C. But the high C tier. So yeah, I'm not a fan personally. I just don't think this deck is that great. I think if I was going to play this as an Aurora deck, it'd be MF. If I was going to play this as a mid-range deck, maybe Sivir's a little better in that regard, but I think the Miracle aspect of this did take a big hit. So I'm not a fan of Sivir overall. I think this deck, I think it was more of a loser than a winner here. Maybe it's about the same. It's kind of hard to say, but I don't know. Not a fan.
Next up, we've got Fiora, Grand Duelist. Fiora, we did still drop into the C tier. We did see, of course, some early results with her in China, but she basically never replicated that at all in the West. Has not converted well at all. Has not basically done anything in the format. And while she did lose technically. She actually did lose a little bit because the Monastery of Hirana was actually a pretty big deal for her as one of her draw engines. Of course, notoriously, Collin's mentioned many times, this color combination doesn't have any draw. That's why in like Sett, we were playing 3 draw battlefields. Fiora now lost one of her better draw engines. So yeah, that she did actually just lose a little bit, but still definitely a better card than Metal Card Side Quest at least. So we dropped her in the C tier. She hasn't moved. Any thoughts, anyone? Colin?
Yeah, notably, she didn't actually lose Monastery of Verona as much. It's mostly just the combination of Warmog's Armor plus Monastery of Verona
Right.
is something that doesn't work anymore because you have to have the buff there in the first place and spend it in order to put the trigger onto the stack. Previously, you could stack it in any order and then you would pay costs as it resolved. But now they've changed that, so to even put the trigger on this stack in the first place, you have to have the buff there, so it doesn't work with Warmog's Armor. But she still has other ways to provide buffs, so I don't think it'll be a significant nerf for either her or Sett, but maybe just nerfs to Warmog's Armor, which was already like a pretty mediocre card in the first place, so I don't mind losing any reason to play that card. But yeah, the only thing I'll say is that we were previously proponents of only Hook Fiora being playable because it was the only one that had any sort of chance into beating Draven. Now maybe some sort of mid-range Fiora list will do a little bit better, but I do think that she just kind of is a little bit too fair and slow to ever beat an Aurora deck. She's always going to get cooked by Imperial Decree, and then Kaisa, maybe she'll have some chance into that if you don't just get blown off the board by Singularity, but she just seems to be in like a very awkward spot in the metagame right now.
Any thoughts, Alex?
Yeah, so my biggest issue with Fiora, and I've played a good amount of Fiora, is that she epitomizes what 75% of this game is, which is she's the poster child for a fair mid-range deck in a world of not fair mid-range decks. Like, it feels like most Riftbound sets are designed with 75% of the archetypes and themes to be a fair mid-range deck, and then 25% of the cards designed to be whatever the fuck the meta is, like Miracles, Draven, etc., etc. So I think, unfortunately, Fiora, she's a very solid deck mechanically. She's just too fair. She doesn't really do anything unfair. I think I like the Hook version better because even though the floor is a lot lower, I think that you need that like unfair thing to do with her because otherwise she's just like too fair compared to some of these better decks, especially against decks like Aurora, against decks like Viktor Control. Her best thing that she does is repost, and I don't even think that's enough. So as someone who's played Fiora, I think she's certainly a winner, I would say, from this ban list. Although I do agree that the Monastery hit might be enough to just like kick her out, like kind of kick her out of contention completely. But yeah, I still just think that this is probably a C tier leader. It's definitely better than Metal Card Side Quest for sure, and I don't think it would ever fall there, given that she has some great Chosen Champion signature spell options. So I do think Fiora is probably C tier.
Next up, we've got Lux, the Lady of Luminosity. This one was a bit of a point of contention for the team here as to what constitutes Metal Card Side Quest versus actually being outside of Metal Card Side Quest. We did end up placing it in the C tier because Alex got outvoted, but basically the argument was that this is still a very solid deck, even though it is doing things that are worse than Viktor, most likely overall. It is still nowhere near as bad of a deck as Renata Glask because of the draw power and the Chosen Champ that you get out of Lux. If you want to state your case for why this should be in the Metal Card Side Quest here, let us know.
So my case here was not that the premises that I was given for, I felt that Yasuo should be in C tier because he can do a very similar thing to Irelia, and I didn't think the power level at which he does it was metal card worthy. And I said, well, if there's something that does it better, then it's metal card. And I was like, well, Viktor is just doing Lux's thing better. And I still stand by that. I think Lux is I still think her chosen or her legend ability sucks. I still think she's not very good. I don't even think her chosen champ's that good. I think it's too slow and too weak. Dies a falling star, yada, 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 many such cases. But I still stand by, maybe this is a bottom of C tier legend. I don't know, but I still feel strongly that there is a real contention for this to be Metal Card Side Quest. It is just like a much, much worse Viktor. But even further, I feel strongly that Yasuo should be in C tier more than I feel this should be in Metal Card tier. But yes, I do think this has a non-existent Sig spell. You only have one of the Chosen Champs you can use, and I don't even think it's that great. The legend ability is not that great to me. It's like almost like it's just like it happens to be in a color combination where like you have enough of these spells that like you'll probably draw like 2 or 3 cards over the course of a game. That's not like a total grind fest. So whatever, so be it. Lux and C tier. I've lost the war on this one. So
any thoughts, Colin?
I mean, yeah, from our perspective, I think the Lux deck is doing enough different from the Viktor deck that it is, while obviously worse, it is a unique deck in of its own, where it's heavily reliant on Vanguard Armory in order to win, and then just playing all the spells. That was kind of Viktor's original identity at the start of Set 2, that people have kind of adapted, and especially with Draven falling out of the meta, we expect to see it similar to Set 1 Viktor lists that will have some combination of units and spells, which gives it a completely different deck identity in my mind, and why Lux is still here is it's a half decent deck. It's playing some broken stuff. You draw a bunch of cards, ideally, to see your Imperial Decree plus Bella's Breath quicker. But yeah, that was our decision point on that one.
Next up, we've got Sett the Boss. Sett didn't really lose or gain anything from this other than the Monastery of Hirana change, which I think Colin already mentioned. I think it hurt other decks like Fiora and Lucian more than it hurt Sett, because Sett has always played a lot of ways to get buffs because of his legend ability needing buffs specifically. But yeah, I think Sett is still solidly in the upper middle C tier. Zhonya's Hourglass is still a really powerful effect, turns out. Colin, any thoughts on Sett in the new format?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sett is one of the biggest winners of the Draven hit, as Draven was by far and away your worst matchup, and a lot of that was due to fight or flight. That being said, where one of your biggest enemies falls, another prospers, and he has historically always struggled into Aurora decks, as there's not really much that you can do into them once they just set up your Aurora. You just kind of lose. So you either have to sabo it on curve, or you just lose. So that's where Sett has historically struggled, and we've just replaced one enemy with an even greater enemy. So that being said, I will try Sett into the new metagame, because obviously he has always had a pretty good Kaisa and Viktor matchup. So maybe with those being some of the better options in the new format, he'll maybe still be able to make it work, and maybe I can find some way to beat the Aurora decks, but only time will tell.
Alex, any thoughts?
No, I think purple held him back pretty hard, so I can see this maybe potentially being a wit, or I know that he's probably pretty good into like a Viktor control style deck. And then Kaisa, I mean, is kind of the same as before. It's probably, I don't know if it got better or worse. It's something we'll just have to test and see, but I do know that Rebuke and purple being the arch nemesis of Sett and kind of falling out of favor a bit, that certainly helps him. But yeah, I don't feel strongly. I mean, Colin's going to know better than I would.
Well, I know
this is going to end up. So
specifically into Kaisa, I know that he got buffed by the reflexive trigger change. So like Falling Star can no longer like kill through Sett ability. So
that is true.
That makes a difference in the Kaisa matchup for sure.
Yeah, I do agree with that. They can't just triple Falling Star you. I think that was one of Colin's biggest complaints was he drew double watch or triple Falling Star, and I just lost. So
yeah, I mean
at least.
There might even be an argument for him to potentially creep up into the Bs again. We'll just have to see, because I do think like, yeah, while purple was also pounding him, like Draven specifically was just like, again, as we've said, like holding in this game is really hard. Sett's biggest strength was that it was one of the best hold decks in the game, given that you don't lose your material because you just like trade with whatever and retreat one of your guys. So yeah, now that holding isn't being nearly as punished and there's a few less answers, maybe Sett can creep up. But for now, we've placed them in a high C.
Yeah, well, it's definitely up in the air. I think a lot of it just comes down to how he performs into the final legend that we have here, as there still will be some amount of Rebuke running around, I'm sure.
And finally, the moment you all have been waiting for, I'm sure everyone wants to know, where is Irelia, the Blade Dancer? Is she the tier 0 best deck in the game now? Well, we've decided to put her at the very top of A. We actually do not currently believe, given the information that we have and what we know about the game, that there is a true tier 0 right now. So given that. We did put her at the top of A because I think the Viktor matchup is still tough. I think Aurora matchup for her is fairly difficult. All the yellow decks have pretty good outs to her, but of course she's still going to like auto beat Kaisa. She's still going to be farming a lot of these other fair decks. She did still lose a good amount. She lost most of her battlefields. Fight or Flight was also a bit of a loss for her. Of course, she did keep the Stellacorn Herder, which all three of us definitely believe that card should have been included on the ban list, but I do know that is one of her win cons as an Aurora player. That's definitely one of her win cons into you. Like if they just play that on turn 2 and you don't have a way to address it, it's really, really hard to win those games when they start like double or tripling the amount of cards in their hand. Collin, I know you were the one who wanted to potentially put her into S tier. What are your thoughts, Collin? And then Alex can go after you.
Yeah, I was, as Alex was complaining about being outvoted on Yasuo, I was the one that was outvoted on Irelia here.
The important issues, might I add, where Yasuo falls, not cards like Irelia. Who cares about Irelia?
Yeah, exactly. So I think Irelia is solo S tier. Obviously, she did not get hit substantially out of this ban list. She did lose Fight or Flight, which is a card that she played. But unlike Draven, Fight or Flight was kind of just an efficient hide that did a little bit too much, and it is easily replaceable for her because she was typically using it to save her Irelia or Stellacorn from a rebuke or some sort of large combat, more so than it was being used to push your opponent's units back. It was played because it had both options, but you can kind of get around that by either increasing the amount of copies of Flash that you play, or if you want it for a free option for the hidden, then you also have access to Emperor's Divide. So Irelia, more so than Draven, has options to just play a slightly worse version of Fight or Flight, if that's really what she's looking to do. That being said, Dreaming Tree and Obelisk were big hits, as those are both battlefields that helped her a lot. But this is the only deck other than Draven that we saw that had a consistent above 50% win rate, and her main engine was not hit. With the exception of the card behind me, like her main engine and what she does, the complete nonsense of drawing approximately 8 million cards off of Stellacorn Herder, for whatever reason, was deemed to still be fair enough to exist. So she gets to live on and become, in my opinion, our new best deck, new Overlord that we'll have to contend with. I do know that she did struggle into Draven previously, but she is a very flexible deck, whereas her new, previously, Bryn here was her thing that she had to build her deck around. Now it's going to be Imperial Decrees and Dazzling Auroras, both of which I think she has potential options of counterplay. And to both of those, she can just start playing Wind Walls. She can just start playing Adaptatrons and Rakes and all these sorts of cards in order to answer the Aurora decks if those are really her problem. So I am still of the opinion that she is going to be a significant problem for the metagame and will be solo S tier. But I am the only one on the team who believes that. So, and I hope that they're right for what it's worth, and that we have a metagame that looks exactly like this, because this is significantly more balanced than we've seen.
So much better.
Riftbound. Yeah.
Yes.
So if the tier list really does shake up like this, then it will be quite better for the health of Riftbound as a whole. So I'm crossing my fingers that I'm wrong on this one, and that maybe the Imperial Decrees out of Viktor are enough to keep her down.
Alex, any thoughts on Irelia?
Yeah, I still stand by that. I think with the rise of yellow decks, she was the third most dominant deck before, but that's because there weren't a lot of great yellow options. They kind of get held in check by the Draven and Miracle decks, and now those decks get to kind of come out and play. Same thing with the Aurora decks. I can tell you one deck that is very excited to bump into Irelia, and that is Reksai. So if you are a Reksai enjoyer, just know that Aurelia's should not stand too hard in your path to victory. But I do think that there are some hands, and I'm hoping they're a little less consistent now without the Dreaming Tree, but there are some hands in Irelia that are just like damn near unbeatable for just about any deck. And those hands obviously change from deck to deck depending on what you need, how many defies you need versus how many pumps you need. But I do think not banning the Herder was a mistake. I do think that Herder is one of the ones that actually might get a little worse as time goes on. It might, like, as more degenerate stuff comes up, like the Set 3, I think the Herder ban was more for now than it is for Set 3, where like a Brynhir Aurora ban is more for Set 3 than it is for now. But I do think not banning Herder was a little bit of a miss, and I do see where this deck could potentially be S tier. I'm just not willing to put it in there without seeing how it fares against these yellow decks. And yes, of course, Kaisa is like an auto win for this. But even the Kaisa decks, I think, can try to adapt a little to not just automatically fold to Irelia anymore. I don't think it's going to be as bad. I think this meta could shape up to be something really good. I don't think we'll see a lot of fair mid-range decks winning as per usual, but I do think that I do think that Irelia, while being maybe at the top of A tier, is not quite going to be this uncontestable mistress that people fear she might be, especially with the loss of 2 of her battlefields. Fight or Flight, which even though not crucial to the deck, was still like we said with MF, it's a card that they will now have to play a worse version of. So I do think this deck took some hits here, and I hope that I am right in that she's not just some uncontested S tier deck.
I hope that you're right too, and I win either way, because either I'm right and I get to say I told you so, or you're right and we have a pretty healthy looking metagame.
Yeah, I mean, I would say overall we're pretty happy with the ban list, even though we do think that there could have been a couple more cards on there at least. Overall, if the format does end up looking like this, I'm thinking Riftbound's in a really good spot. I mean, we've got a lot less guys in Metal Sidecard Quest. You could even make an argument for Darius being in the C tier. We just kind of decided to throw him down there, but wouldn't argue with you too bad if you wanted to put that guy in C tier. And just, yeah, having a lot of things in B and C with like still a solid amount of options in A. I mean, this overall looks pretty balanced, and I'm hoping that the format does look something like this. If you guys who are watching this think that we've got this all wrong, or you just have something you want to say, go ahead and drop that in the comments below. We'll have a more definitive tier list after our testing right before the regionals. As usual, we'll have our regional tier list, so keep an eye out for that. You know, we'll have to see what happens in these Ruins and Rift events and other cash events leading up to that, and you know, we may reform our opinions after that. Yeah, I'm really hoping Collin's wrong and that Irelia is not the dominant force, even though I hate Stellarcorn Herder and that card. Yeah, but yeah,
We all do.
Yeah, we all hate Stellarcorn Herder here. But yeah, if you guys like our videos, please subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. We will see you guys next time, and we will have more set review stuff coming soon. So keep an eye out for that this week. Later.
Bye, everyone.
Challenger TCG is now powered by TopDeck.gg. TopDeck.gg is the tournament software you want to be using when hosting any tournament. It has instant pairings, a robust mobile app, integrated payments, and an easy-to-use interface, all for just $12 a month. You can get a free 14-day trial right now if you want to try out the software, and use promo code CHALLENGER for an additional month free of charge. If you decide you want to keep the software, use promo code CHALLENGER25 for a 25% discount off your yearly subscription plan.